I've taken a great interest in ethnobotany. Ethnobotany is the study of people and plants, medicinal plants. It was previously understood as shamans and as healers, curanderos, and those within the community, men and women that served the tribe and the clan, the community. Traditionally, they would take no money for the work that they would do in the community. It was a given gift. They shared with the community, and the community in turn took care of them. They're not unlike the Buddhist priests of many traditions that would pray and meditate on behalf of the community and the world, and they would have their bowl, and that they would walk through the village and people would put rice and vegetables into their bowl and feed them and care for them. Nobody owns health. Nobody owns the right to control it. This is a symbiotic relationship, as much of nature is. If you go back and look at the healers, the elders, the wise women, the shamans, people often wonder, where did they learn this? They learned it from the other elders that taught them. It was an oral tradition. And it was a year ago. We were in Kona, Hawaii. Our organization holds an annual retreat. And by retreat, we do mean a place to retreat and to think. And we had the great honor of hearing from a great Hawaiian leader named Nainoa Thompson. Year on year, he is considered the most respected person in Hawaii. He is responsible with a handful of others of restoring the lost knowledge of sea navigation in the Pacific Islands. And he told us the story of how this was lost and how it was regained. The reason that we now have to rely on books and on videos is that we have lost the ability, literally lost the ability to store and hold what could be hundreds of generations of genealogy or hundreds of formulations that require very specific technical knowledge, or the knowledge to navigate across the Pacific Ocean when you're navigating by the stars and by the sun and by the color of the waves and the cloud formations and patterns, and you're 5,000 miles away from a little tiny dot of an island, and you have to hit it dead on, and they do. One of the great herbalists, Dr. John Christopher, who I had the pleasure of meeting just once, very early in my career. He was among the last of the great herbalists of his time, from the 1950s to the late 1980s. He looked like Colonel Sanders. He always wore a three-piece suit, and he had this beautiful white mustache and goatee, and he was a very gentle soul. And he deeply believed that everything that he had been given or received.
We have a mother. Mama is the one who begat us, but Mother Earth is the one that made us. We are from Mother Earth. And if you don't believe that, from dust thou art, and to dust shalt thou return. And I'm hoping that after these sessions that we'll put better dust back into the earth than we're walking around with right now.
And he did something unusual because he understood for the first time, I'm going to write down all of the formulas that I have been taught and I have learned, and I'm going to give them away. And he did. And he wrote a book called The School of Natural Healing. And that book, there is a school still here in Utah called the School of Natural Healing. And that is the primary course study. And I grew up on this book. We're talking about enormous amounts of knowledge and information. How to identify plants at different times and seasons, and what part of the plant is to be used. And the combination of plants. And right behind me, you might be able to see a few little corn stalks rising. We're growing here at home the Three Sisters, which is corn and squash and beans. This was taught by the Native Americans, and this tradition is thousands of years old in the Americas. Why is that? Turns out that these three plants have a symbiosis, is that they grow together, and when they are eaten together form a full protein. The amino acids in each one of them are somewhat different. You put them together and it provides the kind of protein that we need as humans. This is the kind of symbiotic understanding and relationship you see among plants, and then you see it among people. For the longest time, our government didn't know what to do with us, where to put us. And this was a source of constant friction. The way that the FDA works is in a very binary fashion. The whole system was designed with foods on one side and drugs on the other side. And there was no in between. You had to be one or the other.
The Food and Drug Act prohibited interstate commerce in adulterated and misbranded foods and drugs. Products that violated the law could be seized and destroyed.
Well, the history of natural medicine, of supplements, which is much the same, is that we fit in the middle. As Hippocrates said, let food be your medicine. That's what we were trying to do. But that did not fit the model of the FDA. And so for decades and decades, there was this constant battle between our industry, which nearly disappeared. Right after World War II, there was this tremendous growth of, during the war and after the war, innovation and new invention was essential, and it was urgent. Penicillin was first used on a marine in Okinawa in May of 1945. And from that moment to the present, the generation of antibiotics that we take for granted now completely changed in many ways how people understood modern medicine and the miracle of synthetic chemistry. The pharmaceutical industry operates on a principle of exclusivity. Their economic model is based fundamentally on getting a patent and an exclusive right to sell a drug. For those that really believe in the power of nature, we were being left behind, both by government regulation, but also by consumer interest. That there were generations of great herbalists and natural healers, naturopaths and chiropractors, homeopaths, water therapy, and the list goes on and on. That was largely destroyed in 1910 with the creation of the Flexner Report. Most people have never heard of this. This was something funded by the Rockefellers. The Flexner Report was designed to get rid of hundreds and hundreds of alternative medicine colleges. That was the real goal. And it succeeded. The short story is that those that designed the criteria to evaluate the competence of these medical schools chose Johns Hopkins Medical School as the bar. That was the gold standard at the time. You can imagine that many schools couldn't reach that gold standard, and consequently, over a short period of years, were shut down. And the idea was, they looked around and saw there were hundreds and hundreds of medical schools of all sorts that were teaching naturopathy, homeopathy, chiropractic, osteopathy, and so on. And so we had this dark period of our history where we lost the educational capabilities. It was literally wiped off the map by and large. That had to be rebuilt almost from the ground up. Today, on average, your medical doctor will spend about 7 minutes with you. Many patients ask, how much can they really learn and know in 7 minutes? And yet, if you ask medical doctors in practice, they often say the part that's missing is it's that human touch with our patients, which is why their patients are going to go see alternative practitioners. These are people that go see someone who first looks at what is happening in the body as a whole, not just the one symptom. And when I joined this industry in 1981, I had just graduated from law school, which was not the greatest experience of my life. And I realized I didn't want to practice law in a traditional way. And I had the gift and great fortune of being invited to join an herb company as their in-house lawyer. And the company, it's a great company, Nature's Way. Many people have heard of it. They were young at that time, and my mom had never heard of them. And she kept asking, what kind of job is this? So I said, well, they sell herbs. And my mom didn't know what herb would anybody be buying other than culinary herbs. And she kept thinking, does this have anything to do with marijuana? And I kept assuring her, no, it doesn't. This is something really quite different. These are medicinal herbs. And still, she didn't understand what I was talking about. The first time I walked into the building, there was the most unusual smell, brand new to me. Anyone familiar with valerian will know what I'm talking about. It's often described as a plant that smells like a wet dog wearing dirty socks. It has a very unique smell. And that was the day it was being ground and processed in the factory. But I quickly learned the story of how the company was founded, which was remarkable because I had not heard something like this before. The founder's wife had been struggling with cancer for many years, had multiple surgeries, chemo, radiation. Ultimately, she was told, it's back and let's go in one more time. And she said, no, I'm done. That's it. Her husband, thinking there has to be a path, there has to be a way. This is in Arizona. He was asking everyone who would listen, any advice, any suggestions. And he was told, there's a medicine man. He might have some advice. So he did. He was told to go out and collect chaparral bush, familiar to everyone in the Southwest. It is also called creosote bush for a good reason, is that this is what they use to make a chaparral extract and liquid, dipping telephone poles into this stuff because no living thing will touch it. Bugs and ants will leave the telephone pole in the ground alone. And he said, make a tea and give it to her 2 or 3 times a day. They did. She tried to drink it, could not drink it. I repeated the experiment just out of curiosity. I confirm you cannot drink it. So the husband went out and found a little hand press. You can actually make tablets with these little tiny hand presses. And he found one. And so he was taking the chaparral leaves, putting them into the little hopper, and he was punching out these beautiful little chaparral tablets. What he didn't know at the time is that chaparral turns out to be the perfect material to make a tablet. Usually it's a pretty sophisticated art. You need different materials to hold it together so it doesn't fall apart. Well, he had the perfect tablet, so she was taking these tablets. Sometime later, she's out walking around in the morning around the block, and the neighbors are seeing her, and the last they knew, she was on death's door. How is she out walking around the block every morning? So they asked, and they said, well, I'm taking chaparral tablets. And they said, what are those? Can I get some? I have a sick uncle. And can I have some? So they would get little baggies and put in 1 dozen, 2 dozen tablets and giving these things away. And she lived for 27 years. I met her on several occasions. I was impressed that when her doctors told her, this is the end of the road for you if you don't go back into treatment, it was the end of the road for her either way in her mind. And she was a medical refugee. At that point, she left the system and went out into the wilderness. Is there anything out there? Turns out, just a few years later, I went in for a routine dermatology, skin check. My doctor said, "You have a stage 4 melanoma." I had no idea. I was beyond shocked, and I said, "What does that mean?" And it said, "It means you are in serious trouble." And in 1983, 84, there was no treatment for melanoma. And so for 5 years, I lived with this constant fear of, did they get it or not? Nature's Way had a terrific herb library. I became a student of the herbal literature. I had become a medical refugee, and I too was looking for answers. And that's when I really learned the much broader world of what plants are and what they do, and the extraordinary history of healing plants over centuries. But for that experience, I don't think I would have had that interest to really become a student. I wouldn't call myself an herbalist, but I was a student. And it gave me a real sense of peace in that something told me it was all going to work out. And I don't know why I had reason to believe that, but I'm here. It all worked out. I have met so many people over the years in the course of my work that have stories very similar to mine and to Mrs. Murdoch's, where they've had to go out to try and find what they were told didn't exist. My first trade show, well, wow, was that a crazy experience. This was in Anaheim. We've had a wonderful convention that's gone on now for 40 plus years in the same place. So it is our gathering spot. And the first time I went, I was introduced to all kinds of new and different things I'd never seen and heard. I saw people wearing little metal pyramid triangle hats. I thought that was really interesting. And all kinds of herbs and all kinds of healing modalities. And the most interesting people that were totally different than anybody else that I had met before. And I didn't recognize them for who they were. I thought they were slightly eccentric at that time. And it can really be told as the geographies and the cultures of 3 different groups. One is a West Coast group, the hippies. They were the ones doing marijuana and growing weed. Up in the hills of Santa Cruz, up along the Northwest. And then you had the Utah Mormon community. And here in Utah, where we're shooting this documentary, this is the geopolitical center and commercial center of our industry. And then you have the Long Island crowd, as we would call them, and they really are the ones that were the vitamin companies. So you have these 3 distinct cultures, and collectively, we at that time, and I'm referring now to the early 1980s, we were the natural product industry. And that comprised of dietary supplements and the beginnings really of organic foods. And so our task was to try to figure out how to survive, explain to people what our products do. Remembering now, we live in this world in the middle where we say anything about the benefit of herbs, and that would be a problem, because these would be illegal claims, despite the fact that herbs have been used as medicine for thousands of years in virtually every culture in the world. How is it then that the United States created a system that explicitly would not recognize the value and the traditions of these plants? The more I learned about it, the more I thought this is just flat out wrong, that our system needs to be changed. And we had to fight in the 1930s, in the 1970s, in the 1990s. And every time we did that, we built a generation of fighters. Our history as an industry is one of having congressional champions. The first one was named Royal Copeland, a senator from the state of New York. And in the 1930s, he protected homeopathics in the first important food and drug law, which is why they're available today. And again, in the mid-1970s, we had another champion named William Proxmire from Wisconsin. And this was a time when FDA had decided that vitamins were a problem. and that they needed to cap the potency of vitamins so people wouldn't take too much. There were a whole lot of consumers that thought this was a very bad idea. And so we saw for the first time in our modern history of this industry the rise of the natural product consumer and what a force they are. That the Congress passed a law and told FDA to stand down, and they could not cap the potency of vitamins, and they could not control the combination of vitamins. And that's why in this country we can buy vitamins at relatively high potency with any kind of combination that you find desirable. But that left us with this problem with herbs. We couldn't figure out the answer to that problem. And so we realized we didn't have the money, we didn't have the lobbying horsepower. What we had was people power, and that we used it.
I became a vegetarian as a protest against the Vietnam War when I was graduating from college back in 1968. I was 22 almost, coming out of college, and had to think about what's true for me and what are my values and what's life about. And in the process of becoming a vegetarian, I started going to health food stores in Austin, Texas, where I went to college. So they had food for special dietary use, for diabetics, people for low sodium diets, and a wall of herbal teas on the shelf. Some of which I recognized: peppermint, chamomile, because Peter Rabbit's mother gave him chamomile when he ate all of the carrots in Farmer McGregor's carrot patch, and then got an upset tummy. And in the book, they show Mrs. Rabbit with a pot of chamomile tea, bringing it to Peter. So we have documentation in the literature that chamomile tea is good for upset stomach. It's part of our culture. So I started reading, and the books in the store were about the folklore of herbal medicine and also identifying wild edible plants. And in the wild edible plants books, they had cautions about certain plants that were considered poisonous. And those are some of the same plants that I saw in the herb books as being therapeutic. And I thought that's an interesting disconnect, or at least so I thought, until I realized and learned later that it's about dosage and about consumption of use, and some plants might be therapeutic in small quantities and potentially toxic or injurious in large quantities if you ate them like a salad. So what we saw back then was this dearth of science and just this emerging beginning of publications of science. For me, it was not necessarily that science was the end-all and be-all of it all, but science was the myth of our culture that people believed in to help validate what's true. And because I was finding that people did not necessarily respect and honor the tradition and historical use of herbs, people in the medical profession. We wanted to show people that herbs are not just potential drugs and medicines, but they're foods. Ginger and garlic, turmeric, bilberry, blueberry fashion. And I wanted to get more people in the culture, medicine, regulators, journalists, whomever would listen, consumers, to consider natural herbal medicines for at least first-line therapy before starting to take a pharmaceutically prepared drug, many of which had their basis in botanicals back in the day. We're fond of saying that the word drug is like from an old Dutch word droog, which means to dry, because they dried plants to make medicine. So the whole concept of modern drugs originally came from dried plants, something that's been forgotten in pharmacy and the history of medicine.
And the confrontations between the FDA and the industry were becoming worse and worse. And they were getting very personal and very aggressive. It got to the point that in Washington State, an MD in his little office in Tacoma, Washington, was busted by a SWAT team with flak jackets and guns because he was giving B12 vitamin shots to people. And all the patients literally on the floor, hands behind their heads, and this hit the news. And suddenly people were alarmed everywhere. What is happening? Well, other things of that sort continue to happen. And this great sense of unease began to develop. And companies were raided and their products were confiscated. So I called a number of companies and friends here in Utah. And at that time, we were the Utah Natural Products Alliance, just Utah companies. And we sat and met for 6 months or so, tried to think of every possibility, what could we do? And we concluded, we're going to have to change the law. Literally, it's going to come down to that. Because that was what happened the 2 times previously, and we were taking a lesson from that. And so we worked up a little bill. It was our ideas of what we needed. And we thought it should be called the Health Freedom Act, because that's what it was all about. It was an uprising that astonished all of us. We had millions of consumers. We had blackout days in health food stores. Usually on Tuesday, they would put black crepe paper and black nets over their whole supplement section. Customer would walk in. I need to buy vitamin C. Not today. Why? This is Blackout Tuesday. What is Blackout Tuesday? Glad you asked. It says, unless you sign this petition, and there's the phone to call your member of Congress, you're going to lose the right to buy supplements. Do you get that? And so people said, no. And they would say, yeah, this is real. So we had millions of people who signed petitions. And this is in the old physical days. We had bankers' boxes full of all of these petition sheets that were filled out. And people were calling their members of Congress from a health food store and saying, I need you to sign up on this bill and on this bill. And then this began to build on itself and build on itself.
We also had a gazette and flyers that we handed out to all of our customers, listing every House of Representative, their contact information, every senator, their contact information, and what we implored them to do. And they wrote, they called not only their House of Rep, not only their senator, but every other one that they could think of. It wasn't maybe we can do it, we had to.
We were helped enormously by the fact of having 2 champions in Congress. Senator Hatch, conservative Republican, Senator Tom Harkin, liberal Democrat, worked seamlessly together. Senator Hatch was a true believer. And it's because he really cared about this. He was willing to take a huge amount of political heat, which he did. We were exhausted. We were fighting for 2.5 years. And we said to the senator, we don't know how to get this done. We had hit an impasse and said, let's come back and try it again next year. And he said, we're staying here until it's over. And we're not going to let it go. And we are going to get this thing done. When he said those words, I did not believe them. I underestimated him one more time, and I learned never to do that. And then the cavalry in the form of Hollywood and celebrities came running into the scene. Wow. What they did for us was astonishing. What we realized then, and it is still true this day, is that Hollywood is a great user of and supporter of organic foods and of natural products, of supplements, of vitamins. They are big believers and big supporters. Many of them came to us in the industry and said, what can I do to help? I mean, I'll do a PSA. I'll do an ad. Mel Gibson did a very famous ad. Hey, it's only vitamins.
It's only vitamins.
Vitamin C, like in oranges. And we had Whoopi Goldberg, and we had Laura Dern, and we had all of these country folk artists that were jumping into it. Jim Coburn, the list goes on. And they kept coming back and saying, okay, I did one for you, what else can I do now? They helped us raise a lot of money, but more than that, they helped us raise awareness. It's commonly quoted, and I do believe this is a true fact, that the dietary supplement law generated more contacts to Congress than anything other than the Vietnam War. This meant that these congressional offices were being overwhelmed with phone calls, with letters, with petitions, with people coming to their Washington offices, people coming to their local state and district offices. And they couldn't get rid of us. And so one by one, members of Congress have said, I don't care about your dumb dietary supplement bill. They got to a point, it said, if I co-sponsor, will you go away? And we said, deal. And that became our tactic, is that we would simply overwhelm one office at a time until we got the numbers we needed. Everything came to this crescendo at the very end. And there were intense negotiations to try to get this bill over the top. It was 24/7 for about 2.5 weeks. And I was in Washington. I brought 3 or 4 days of clothes thinking that that would be good enough. I ended up being pretty stinky by the end of this 2.5 weeks. I was just recycling clothes, not knowing what tomorrow was going to bring, and realizing we're here until the bitter end, whenever that is, and that when Congress is going to adjourn, about 2.5 weeks in the future. At 11:24 p.m., it's the third to last bill that was read into the law in the U.S. Senate. The House had already adjourned and gone home. And at the very last moment, even then, there was a setup to try and kill our bill at the very end. There was a procedure in the Senate where any one senator can put a hold on a bill. All you have to do is to pick up a phone, call a number, and say, put a hold, in this case, our bill, called the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act. In our industry, we call this DSHEA. And the clerk of the Senate will literally go and physically remove your bill from a stack of bills that are about to be read in, to be passed. Well, somebody did this. And now there's this frantic scramble to figure out who was it. We figured out who it was. And we had a message sent by a page. So Senate protocol is that there are no phones down there. And so you have pages, runners, that will take a message from the staff and run it into the senator, very 1700s. And so we saw the runner go in with the note, and he read it, and then he went over to the other senator. And we knew there were going to be sparks, and there were. As it turns out, the other senator had 5 federal judges that he had nominated, but they required Senate confirmation. Senator Hatch said, this is an important bill to me, the supplement bill. How important are your judges? And in a very heated and colorful conversation, he finally relented. He let go of his hold, and our bill barely made it in and was passed at 10:24 at night, third to last bill. And there were a group of us sitting in the Senate lounge for staff, and I think that we were so numb at that point that it was done, it's passed, it has actually happened. We didn't have the strength to celebrate. I remember just standing up and shaking hands with everybody in the room and saying, well done. Dragged myself back to my hotel, and I just couldn't go to sleep fast enough. But the next morning when we all woke up, and we thought, we're literally living in a new world. And nobody knew really what this meant. There were a handful of people that actually understood what this law said, what it meant. The rest of the industry and millions of consumers that worked so hard on behalf to get this law passed, they didn't know what it meant, other than this will protect our right to use supplements. And when the word began to go out that the law had passed, there was celebration coast to coast. And I mean, there were many tears shed, and there was a sense of elation and disbelief in some quarters. Certainly at FDA, there was a sense of disbelief of what just happened here. For the first time in American history, we were recognized in federal law as existing. And this was a long time coming. That we exist in an industry of dietary supplements that comprises a very wide range of products. Everything from the vitamins that most people take, all the way over to probiotics and fish oil and so many other things, essential oils.
The industry started with food, and then the nutraceutical grew out of it, and then the ingredient grew out of it, and we now know that ingredients run the world. Bread baskets, places in the world that are impacted, and this might be the most important industry in the world today. And anybody that's here, the wisdom is that we are responsible. We are the sustainers of the planet.
Quality control has always been a problem. A lot of products aren't tested here in the US. They're manufactured overseas. People who insist on buying raw materials at below production cost, which causes the production of these adulterated or diluted products.
I think education continues to be vitally important. You know, we're in 2024, and all the time I am seeing, you know, influencers who have absolutely zero knowledge of dietary supplements. So as working for a raw material supplier, and we do studies, and I share and I educate with the brands to teach them. And we love the idea that any of those brands are taking that information and conveying it to the consumer.
I think what industry has to really focus on is consumer trust and how to keep that trust. And so self-regulatory initiatives will keep DSHEA healthy. And the whole generation of next leaders in the industry really need to appreciate why we have DSHEA, what our consumers need, and how do we continue to build their trust. Without that, DSHEA is threatened.
I think women have a very keen sense of intuition around natural health, natural products. And if they could bring that, if they could tap into that part of themselves, I think their voice could just take us in directions that we didn't even know we could possibly go. Especially when you consider that about 80% of those who make decisions around health supplements, medicine, medical care, are women. We're making those decisions for our families, our spouses, etc. And so I love when I get to meet women, younger women who are coming up and coming through and have a passion. And I don't mean for women's health products, because women shouldn't be relegated to just women's health products, but really taking on a much bigger role in having a bigger voice in this conversation.
What is the task ahead? It's protecting the First Amendment, the freedom of speech. It's in our Constitution, but that doesn't mean that we can't lose it. We're entering a time when our industry in particular is going to be and has been a target. There is a level of censorship that is now happening, and it has happened for a number of years, but we have never seen this convergence of technology and centralized control over that technology. California tried to abolish the ability of a doctor and a patient and the privacy of the office, the doctor's office, to have an honest conversation about natural health versus synthetic, vaccines versus options, to disagree with the policies of the American Medical Association, then you put your license on the table. In a marketplace of ideas, it's not less information, it's more information that we need. If we disagree about things, let's discuss them. Let's have the right of dissent. That is what this country is based on. That's a fundamental principle, and it's one worth fighting for. We have done so in the past and will continue to do so, is the right to speak what we believe is the truth and to share the knowledge that comes from traditional wisdom. There is a profit motivation in the pharmaceutical industry that is very different than we see in our industry. Most of the drugs that have been discovered over the last century are derived from plants. But you take the plant, which is a complex mixture of chemistry, and I would say an element of mystery and magic, that has been transformed into isolated chemicals, synthetically produced, which can be patented. So it's to denature that which was natural at one time. This is what our community seeks to preserve and to protect. Take us back to our original roots, literally and figuratively, where we can understand the knowledge of the ancient wisdom and add to that new knowledge using new technology and new insights. And if we can marry those two together, we will win the next battle, whenever, wherever, and however it comes to us.